We are continuing our conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and today's conversation is going to touch on some very difficult subjects. We're going to hear some personal stories and unpack some of the complexity of these issues, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to another Future Tech video podcast. The audio version of the podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most of the others. Or you can find it at futr.buzzsprout.com. Celia Daniels is an Indian trans woman, entrepreneur, public speaker, activist, motivator, musician, artist, photographer, and filmmaker. She grew up in southern India and faced intense stigma, discrimination, and violence while trying to come to terms with her gender dysphoria. Celia has built a life full of accomplishment, and now she writes and speaks passionately about her struggles and the challenges she faced in her family, work, school, and community, both in the U.S. and India. She is a management consultant for top Fortune 500 companies, and we are feeling very privileged to hear her story. Welcome, Celia.
Welcome, Chris, and welcome, Sandesh. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We've spoken before, and you have some really incredible stories to share with us, and I'm really excited to dig into it. So, as we get started here, I was wondering if you could maybe, let's start with your personal journey. Your childhood, growing up in India, and how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, I love to talk a little bit about my past, and I thought about it, how do I tell my story? And I have 5 dimensions to it. So the first dimension is dreaming, doubting, living in denial, discovery, and then my destiny. So this is my story, and I'm going to probably cover all these 5 dimensions when I'm telling my story. But so the first one is more on dreaming. So when I was 4 years old, when I grew up, my mom looked at the social constructs of the way in which India was organized at the time, and it was so binary. And she saw something in me that was very different, because she was worried at the same time she was thinking about, oh my God, I don't want my son to be trans, because I was so much interested in women clothing. I wore my mom's saree. I was running around the house. This was just 4 years old. And in my mind, all that I had was, I want to be a girl. And the way I could only express myself is just by dressing up with whatever I had. And I had no social media. I had no television at the time, not even radio in the house. But there was something in me that kept telling me that my gender was not doing justice to my anatomy. It was very different at the time. And I remember I was dressing up for a very long time. And I thought life was so fluid at that point in time. Maybe I was too young to grapple with the fact of patriarchy. But when I was probably in my 7 years old, my mom said, "You're a boy, you shouldn't be wearing these clothes anymore." And that's when it hit me that, I can't wear these clothes anymore. So I started, I was always, I just went back to the closet, but I felt so down and let down at that point that I could not be myself, and I wasn't enjoying. So I had to take the feminine side of my life into the closet. And I didn't want to tell my parents. That's the first time I felt shame. Until then, I didn't know it was okay. And when my mom said, "You can't do it because you're a boy," and then it hit me. And so that was the part where my dream became a doubting part of it. So I didn't know why I was doing this. And I just thought maybe I should suppress my femininity and just move on or survive with my life. So I was going through a lot of emotions, and I was going through gender dysphoria, which we call now. So gender dysphoria is basically you're born in one gender and you want to be in another gender. And sometimes you're switching between genders too, because you're not in one gender for the rest of your life, and you're between genders. And like me, I'm more gender fluid, or I would say gender non-variant, gender variant. So a person like me, most of my life I spend as Celia, but since I have not medically transitioned, there is a part where gender dysphoria exists. And I hope this terminology, gender dysphoria, is not anxiety, but it's more of that you're not able to live in a gender that you want to choose. I'll give you an example. When I drive my car today, I drive like Celia. And sometimes when I'm not Celia, the way I drive my car is very different. And sometimes even when I walk into a store, I have been to the store as Celia. Sometimes when I'm going as Daniel, sometimes it's very different. There are so many. It's a separate life by itself, and I have no idea how my life just became that way. And I remember I'm moving on in my life. I wanted to just be a boy because I loved the privilege of being a boy in India and growing up in a Southern Asia, a South Asian country, especially South India. Being a boy was a privilege, and I did not want to let go of that privilege. But at the same time, I wanted to be a girl, but I was enjoying this privilege. And not long ago, I just wanted to give a little bit of a trigger warning for folks who are, especially listening to this part of my story. I didn't realize that I was at a point in my life, I was so vulnerable. I was living a very vulnerable life because of my shame, and I suddenly felt so. My self esteem was very low. And it was one night when my uncle took advantage of me. He sexually molested me. And that was the time I really felt let down because I really liked my uncle. And I did not know what to do. And I didn't want to tell my parents because it was a lot of shame. Again, it's another layer of shame on top of it. And I just wanted to move on with my life and, just didn't want to think about it. And just 2 years after that, my cousin brother molested me. Now I'm here sitting and thinking, what is wrong with me? I'm not blaming them at all, but I'm at a point where I'm just blaming myself because I already have this vulnerable feeling that I'm different. So there was a layers of trauma being built on top of it. And interestingly, we were born in a Christian family. So with growing up with all the Christian values, which they talk about as values, but I felt like as a man, I shouldn't be wearing women's clothes. And it says that in the Bible for different contexts now that I know. But at the time, I felt so sinful. Another layer of trauma being piled on top. I started doubting myself so much. And I thought, you know what? I think I need to move on. I was just trying to live in a denial, saying that this feeling will go away. I will probably get over it and I'll be okay. So in my ninth grade, I was so excited. And that was the first time ever I went out in India as Celia. And I wore a long skirt and I wore a long top, just some t-shirt, and I covered my head with a scarf, like a hijab. And I walked outside. I was caught by a few security guards near a construction site. They saw me walking in the evening, in the dusk, and they thought I was a girl. And then they called me, "What are you doing here?" And I walked closer to them, and they noticed that I was a boy in a dress. And the first thing that hit in their minds was the word called umbodu. Umbodu is a word that they use, a derogatory word they use for a trans person in South India. And when I listen to that word, it's like an N word to me. Like it just cringes. And I was cringing because I didn't want them to call me that way. And they kept on repeatedly, they just kept on saying that, and they were threatening to hit me, and they were showing actions like they're going to beat me up. And one man is telling, "Where's your father? I need your dad right now, and I'm going to call him." And I said, no matter what happens to me, I'm not going to tell my dad's name, because I will, even if you do anything to me today, I'm not going to I don't want my dad and mom to take the shame. So I just isolated myself, and I stood alone in that place. And I thought to myself, okay, whatever happens to me today, it's going to end with me. And my dad and my mom, they don't want to see me this way. And it was actually like I was publicly humiliated. Like a lot of people started standing around me. I was wondering, what are they seeing? And then they came there because they found a person, and everyone was just trying to make fun of me. And almost 15 to 20 people were standing around and started yelling at me. And I was talking, and they were all talking to themselves. And I asked this man, where is a place to the market? Out of all the discussion, that man said, this market is over there. And I spoke in Hindi. I knew Hindi at the time, and this was South India. You speak Hindi, it's a different language. So they were a little confused. And I asked them the directions to the market. And when the man showed me the directions, I said, thank you. And I started running. They didn't chase me. They just left it. And I came home. And that's the time I was thinking about committing suicide, because I didn't know what to do. I felt so let down, and I thought, okay, I'm afraid to live. And I'm also afraid to die, because suicide was so hard. It's not easy. I mean, I was at a point where oxygen was out of my lungs. My hands were tied behind my back, and I put a plastic bag on my head, and I was choking myself because I
Yeah.
wanted to die and I didn't want to hang. I was scared. So I was thinking of different options, and I thought, let me just sit down and die. It's easy. It was weird. As a child, ninth grade, you shouldn't be thinking how to die. And
No.
41% of the LGBTQ children, even today, they're going through that. They're attempting suicide. And it's much more a lot in the trans community, because they don't know how to live. They can't talk to their parents. And I had a brother, I couldn't tell my brother about it. So you're living through trauma over trauma, and you're trying to survive. And it's like wave on wave, just hitting you and knocking you down. And I felt like, what would I do? And at the time, I found solace in music, which was very interesting. And I started playing the guitar, and I was just natural at it, I think people tell me. And I started picking up music. I started writing songs because I had so much of trauma in my heart. It just came out as songs. I started writing songs. I started writing songs about society, about why God would disown me. Lots of songs I started writing, started singing. I was in a band, and I kept my mind focused on something else. I did my college studies. In fact, I think music actually pulled me through my college studies, because I was really good in music. I was doing well in the band, and I went all over the country. I have also performed in front of Rajiv Gandhi. He was one of the prime minister of India. I have also performed in
Wow.
front of him. I sang some songs, and I'm a President Scout award. I got an award from Zail Singh, who was the president of India at the time. So I'm an old timer. Probably the young ones who are listening to the podcast might not even know what I'm talking about. Some might know, but it was interesting that I was so accomplished, and I didn't even expect all these things to come in. And I was like, really good. And here I was thinking, okay, I can do something with my life. I'm not all worthless. So I started thinking about what can I do more. And it's just was very interesting because I was very good at work, and I started doing coding in Indian Institute of Science. I was a research associate, and I started programming, and I worked on the first human genome project that came to India. So this was in early 90s. So the project was sent and the funding was sent to India. And I worked on Unix and C, and I was doing a lot of programming. I was enjoying my work because that kept me away from gender dysphoria. And it was like I would go to this place, and every time I find a joy in something else, Celia would come back and say, you are still a girl inside. You're just pretending in your life. And I could not, in India, it's very hard, difficult for you to express. If you express as a woman in India, and especially being in a very high position and doing a lot of work in India, high visible jobs, your life will get messed up. And I did not want to do that because I like doing what I do. I love programming. I love doing things at work. And I moved on with my life, and I still thought, and that's the time when I went into the denial part.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, maybe if I get married, it'll be okay. Because I was not attracted to men, I was attracted to women. And I saw this beautiful girl, and it was an arranged marriage. I saw her picture. My parents said, "You want to talk to her?" And I said, "Oh, sure." And I fell in love, and she fell in love with me. And I didn't want to tell her about my gender dysphoria because I seriously believed it will go away if I marry a woman, because I want to be a woman, and here is a woman, and she's a part of me. It was very logical and very biblical too. Leaving and cleaving and all the beautiful concepts you read by Adam and Eve. I was applying everything, and I said, finally, my life will be all put together. I married this woman. We came to this country. I was working for Dun & Bradstreet at the time, and I was really doing well. My CEO at the time, he called me and said, you're really good in your communication. Why don't you go manage accounts? So from a business analyst from a programmer to a business analyst, I immediately jumped into account management. I didn't know anything about business. I just took over an account and I managed it. And naturally I was successful but I always felt like I was not worthy or I was not good enough. Because a lot of people like me, especially the trans community, they're very creative. They're really good in what they do. But when you have the stigma, when you grow up with the stigma, it always pulls you down. It kind of makes you feel like, you're not good enough. And it takes away every joy that you have in being successful. And that's what happened to me. And after that point in time, I started telling my wife about who I am and what was going within me. And she did not get it because, she was from India. And that was the time I remember that night I told her that, sweetheart, I'm trying my best, but I don't know what's going on. I want to tell you this. She told me, you're very successful in business, and you're a boss of this company, and people adore you, and they all want to work with you, and you have so much of equity as a professional that you have built, and why do you want to just let go of all that? Just pretend like nothing is wrong. I think it is fetish. That's the word she used. And it just hit me hard. And I said, maybe it is, but I want to find out. And that's the time when the discovery started in my life, the fourth dimension, where I thought about it and I said, what is it that in my life, why am I different? I'm a man, but why do I want to be a woman? Why does a successful Indian entrepreneur or a businessman want to be a woman? That's the last thing they want to do. And I didn't know because I was professionally successful. Personally, I was dying inside. I would just do a business deal, do a presentation, come back to my room, remove the suit and jump into a maxi dress and just curl up and cry and sit and watch TV while my friends are having a happy hour outside because I couldn't take it. It was something that I can't even explain. It's so hard because it was something that, it's always when you're growing up that way, all these emotions hit you and you feel like you're kind of battling between two genders. And there's your feminine side of it, like a motherly nature, this want to cuddle you. And then this professional side wants to be that arrogant businessman kind of attitude, like, I don't care, whatever you are, kind of attitude. And I couldn't do both. It was so difficult for me to navigate between both my genders. And that's the time I realized that I need to discover more. I need to learn more. And I kept telling my wife, and my wife wouldn't understand. And she said, well, no matter what happens, don't tell your daughter because she can't know that her dad is trans. And I really wanted to take it to my grave. And that's basically the point. I said, okay, whatever happens to me, they're not going to see Celia at all. They'll only see Daniel. That's it. And that was my career. And I started discovering, I started reading articles, I started going to conferences, and I started understanding and learning. I looked at medical journals, I looked at science journals. I remember reading articles on research papers. I'm not talking about Google. I'm actually talking about actual research papers written from Stanford, Johns Hopkins, and so many other universities on why would a person behave differently. I looked at a lot of data that I was studying was more about there are chemical imbalances or hormonal imbalances. And that's the time I understood and I started blaming myself. And I said, but I'm an XY or an XX chromosome. That's how people are defined. Why is this happening to me? And then I said, then when I read more, it said it's not the X and Y, but it's 23 pairs of chromosomes. You've got so many things going on and everybody, 7.8 billion people in this planet, and all of us are different. So I need to grapple that thought. And I started discovering more and more. The more I started discovering, my eyes just popped open. And I was like, why am I hiding myself? If this is all true, I don't have to hide anymore. Can I just come out? So I did, actually. I came out in my community, and I went to a church and I spoke to this pastor saying that, can I come to your church? Because I was very strong in my faith as well. Faith was important to me because that really kept me out of all this nonsense and people, accusing me. And I always used to go to that part of my life where I felt like there was only one person who understood me, and it was God. So it was invisible. God was invisible, so it was much more easier to deal with. But rather telling my parents than going through the whole concept. So that supreme power, that universe, was there for me. And I knew that's helping me through. But I remember coming out in a newspaper. They covered my story. This is in Simi Valley in Southern California. I came out and I spoke about my story, and I was so happy. And I thought, everyone is going to be super happy about my story. Actually not. They were like, this is a man in a dress who needs medical help. That was a comment in the newspaper. And they were just blatant about it. And people started writing all nonsense saying that such people should never exist in the society. You are a disgrace to our Christian community. You call yourself a Christian. You don't belong here. Worst lot of things. And I started coming out even more. And I thought to myself, I can either sit and sulk about it and cry about it or do something. And that's when I started coming out and I said, you know what? I don't care. The interesting thing, which people, if you're listening to this conversation, sometimes your own community, which is trans community, won't accept you. And that happened to me. They said, Celia, if you're coming out, you need to transition medically. You're not willing to transition medically, then you are still a cross-dresser. They just put me in some boundary that I was not even belonging to that part of it. And I said, why can't I be myself? My family is important. My wife is important. My daughter is important. I'm not going to transition. I don't feel like transitioning. And I'm going through a lot of other issues. I have, cardiovascular issues now. And I didn't want to tell them all that, but I said, I don't want to transition. And they said, then you are just marginal. You're just eating away our glory and our space. And that was the time what I did was I started reaching out to allies. So even today, allies like yourself are so important to me because my wife is my ally, my daughter is my ally today. So allyship begins at your home, it begins in your office, it begins in your community. And that's what I found, that people began to appreciate me when I told them that I didn't want to transition. They said, be yourself. Well, who is asking you to do what? Just be yourself. And that gave me so much joy. And I started becoming an advocate for human rights. And that's when HRC gave me an award in 2019 for my service to the community, not because I'm trans, it's because I have a heart for human to human. And that's what I was given that award for. And I started standing up for immigration rights. I started standing up for healthcare bill issues, people who are incarcerated, and a lot of issues around homelessness and trans youth who were kicked out of the homes, going to the school board and talking to the school board about why trans education is important, to all the way up to the workplace, to everywhere I could find, even to the police station. I've been to LAPD, I've been to Hollywood police station. I've spoken to all the police officers about my story, and I literally showed my ID card and said, if you pull me over, what would be the situation? And they said, they gave me a lot of pointers. And they said, if you're gender non-binary, just tell them you're gender non-binary. They will understand. So I started educating trans community that don't worry about the police people. They understand, so don't run away from them. But here I was, at time I was dreaming, I was doubting, I was in denial. I started discovering about who Celia is. And now this is what I want to do. I never in a heartbeat want to be a woman. I never in a heartbeat want to be a man, but I just want to be who I am today. And that is my destiny. And I just learned to accept it. I learned to take control of it. And I started empowering it. And that's why I enjoy doing what I'm doing, because it gives me so much joy. And I know this is what I want to do.
That's a heavy story. I mean, God, as a kid in that situation, just going back to, your story about, being publicly shamed. I mean, first of all, it's so hard for me the thing that's hard for me to understand is like, how could somebody do that to a kid, to start with, and just like, I think you're a very resilient person, for being able to struggle through that, and to come out the other side and like be a positive, person, I think that's.
And it's the part, Chris, too, is that, it's the Indian community too. Me growing up as Indian myself, I really understand some of the things that she is stating, I have those conversations with my own family, right? Trying to educate them about these kinds of topics, and so I totally feel that part of it. And that's why I think it's just so important for us to educate a lot of those folks a little bit and, expose it and have these kinds of conversations. I mean, your story is so powerful for even that community, and I think that's, if we can educate them and they actually hear what you just said, I think that is just so incredibly powerful, and it can help them better understand it.
Well, everyone's more than a gender. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people. It's
right.
It's a shame that people can't live their lives, and it just makes you think about the silent struggle that so many of the people that you meet are going through, right? And that's tough. I mean, because it's not, human life is a spectrum, and we try to put goalposts and labels on things, but the reality is, I mean, everything from sexuality to attraction to gender and like even beyond that to just like different types of thinking. I mean, non neurodivergent people, and we have such a rich pool of so many different qualities and personalities and things like that. And it's just a shame because I think so many people aren't able to reach their potential because they're held back by really, at the end of the day, stupid things. And I think one other interesting thing I kind of wanted to touch on too that I thought was really interesting in what you were saying is that as a boy in India, you wanted to enjoy that privilege. And then as you came over to America and you're in the business world and you wanted to enjoy that privilege of being a man. I think, we've had a lot of women on the podcast to talk about, the challenges of being a woman in tech. And I mean, and you have a unique perspective on that, right? I mean, you can very directly speak to, what the difference in that is. I wonder if you might want to just talk about that sense of privilege and how that plays out too.
Yeah, I think, especially with the power that you feel when you are when you're managing a lot of portfolio and your P&L, what happens is you also feel the power, and it kind of sometimes could be negative as well. And sometimes you fail to understand that your colleague who's given the presentation is being called, she's got a great rack. And that's what my friends were mentioning. And she just gave a presentation. We all shook hands. We went and had a beer, and she probably joined us with some soda, and then she walked away because she had to take her next flight. And then immediately my colleague turns back and says, she has a great rack. And to me, that was so demeaning. And I was just trying to fit in at some time because I was trying to please my boss. A lot of times you're pleasing someone, you're like, oh, yeah, it is, she is. And it was so shameful. I felt so hit in my heart that, oh my God, I can't do this. I'm better than that. And I was doing that for a while. I'm not going to deny that because I wanted to fit in, not because I thought she had a rack. I wanted to be her, actually, because she was, my colleagues, when I'd always respected femininity because I feel femininity and I respected that. And here I was with the male colleagues who are enjoying and kind of demeaning that femininity. And I was just being a part of that, which was really hard for me. And slowly what I did was I learned to stand out of that, not because I didn't tell them I'm trans at the time. I had not even come out, but I just stood apart and said, I just stood up for them at some point. And in fact, my boss was talking about, he owns 12 guns in his house. And here's my Indian colleague who wants to please this boss. He's sitting and saying, so what gun do I buy? And I told him, you have an 8-month-old child in your house and you are sitting in an apartment and you're talking to him about buying a gun. Do you really mean it? They don't mean it because they just want to get along with a conversation. And sometimes we don't really think about all the hurtful things we might unconsciously say. And I started standing up, and I wasn't very popular when I did that. The last business that I won was around 35 million. It was a large 5-year contract. I worked over a period of a year and I got this contract. And there was so much of power play within that because I won this business and then my boss wanted to take the credit and all this. And I couldn't take it because I was thinking, what if there was a woman in this role? How would they have treated her? And I could actually talk to my boss and say, hey, this is not going to work. I don't want you to do this. You're upsetting me. As a woman, I think there have been so many problems. And I was thinking deep inside that here is where I'm trying to put my manly outlook to them to make my point. What if I was a trans woman? Forget that I was a woman. What if I was a trans woman? I'll probably be in the bottom of the food chain. And I knew the risk I was getting into. And in my last company, that is Capgemini, I actually came out. I came out where I was sitting in a business suit and I was telling my colleagues that I'm trans, and they're like, "You're serious, right?" I said, "No, I am." And just that I've not come out because I'm not comfortable. I don't know what the company will do. And while I was telling my LGBTQ colleagues that I was 3 levels below the CEO, when we make these tough choices, we sometimes lose and sometimes we gain someone. People just misunderstood me, or they probably thought I wasn't serious about what I was doing. But I have learned to stand up, not just for me, but for people like me. And I remember my boss making fun of an Indian girl because he said, she's looking very pretty. And in a work setting, to make that kind of comment was very, it's not appropriate. And I couldn't tell him that. And I actually said, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I showed a very disinterested face at the time. And I moved out of the account. I moved out of the company, and I then started my own journey. But living as a man and then transitioning and understanding the navigating the space between where women would be, I could really understand. I was always putting myself there. And I always pictured myself walking into a conference room with all board members and a large C-level people, and then giving a presentation. And I thought to myself that how would they perceive me? Because as Daniel, they would accept me in a heartbeat. I have done that many times. Now, when I walk into the same boardroom or there's discussions as Celia and present the same idea, it's just that I look different. The the level of attention and the level of bias will just go down because gender is playing such a powerful role there. And especially patriarchy plays a powerful role there. And that's why, to me, always it's not men dominate in a male dominated community, because workforce is like that. It's a male dominated community, and women are slowly getting in there. But the problem that I see is not white men or white women, but Black men are paid even much more than Black women. For me, just to be marginalized because of my appearance, I have been in lots of interviews. I have argued with senior vice presidents of a company saying that, why don't you put me in front of the executives and I can present this idea and they would definitely like the idea, even if they don't like me. That's where I'm here to change the world. It's like, it's one step at a time. We can't really go around changing everything. We just have to move the needle little by little.
Yeah, no, I mean, we see the sort of culture of toxic masculinity in the tech world all the time. I think it's got to be incredibly difficult to navigate that, if you're not part of that, male club, One of the other things that I think that, we're kind of talking about here, we talked about the wide range of, human existence. And I think that, people are often confused who aren't part of the LGBTQIA plus community, what everything is and means. And I think, for very binary people, they think in a very binary world. You're gay, you're straight, you're male, you're female. It's like, but like we said, it's not. It's more of a spectrum rather than sort of specific definitions. But on your LinkedIn feed, and you sent out an interesting infographic. How does that all play out?
The fundamental thing which we need to remember is sexual orientation is basically what the LG and B folks are going through. Because sexual orientation is different from gender identity. In a very funny terminology, they say that sex is between your thighs and gender is in your head. Gender identity. And there's another definition for folks to remember. They say that sexual orientation is whom you go to bed with, and gender identity is how you go to bed as. So it's a huge difference in gender identity and sexual orientation, part of it. And to me, what is important is my assigned gender at birth is male, but I knew at some point I wasn't completely identifying as in my male gender. I was identifying as a girl, and no one told me. It's just in my head, maybe because of all the variations. There are people like me who are born this way, and when I identify that way, they're called transgender. When you don't identify in the gender you're born, you're called transgender. People who identify in the gender they're born are called cisgender, CIS gender. So, for instance, Sandesh, you're born as a man and you identify as a man, you're a cisgender person. And Celia, I'm born as a man, as Daniel, but I identify as Celia and also as Daniel. And even if I don't identify as Daniel, if I identify as Celia, I'm still a transgender person. So that's the way transgender and cisgender works. The other thing that I thought about was like a cake layer. There are layers in a cake, and your birth gender is important, because you're born there, and then your gender identity is on top of it. Though I was born as a man, my gender identity is a trans because I'm a trans femme, or I would say that because I don't identify as male, and my gender identity is trans. My gender role is based on how I identify in that gender. If I identify as Celia, my gender role is more feminine. If I identify as Daniel, my gender role is more male. And then you have other thing called gender expression. What you're seeing right now is when I'm Celia, I'm identifying in the role and the gender that I prefer, and that's basically because it aligns with what I have in my identity. So that's why it's a gender identity or gender role, gender expression. And then there's also a lot of other areas called romantic orientation. I don't prefer men, I prefer women. So I'm still, and some people may argue I'm still heterosexual in some of my thinking, but I don't think that is the possibility, but I still think that I'm a trans lesbian. And these terminologies are very confusing. And I probably sometimes even think that I'm asexual because I am not really attracted to someone, or maybe I'm just attracted to myself, or I'm not interested in sex. That's the way sometimes I define. I told my wife the same thing too. And the intersex community is the folks who are born anatomically with both genders. That's when the doctors have to make a decision and they end up being androgynous. And sometimes they have to remove one of their genitalia because they want to align them to what the society wants them to align. But that could also cause a lot of risk in their health. And there are close to 145 or 143 million intersex people in the world today. And I've heard a TED talk of one person who was talking about how important it is. So when you really look at gender, it's a spectrum. And you really look at sexuality, it's a spectrum. If you take the Indian culture, if you take the Indian mythology and look at it, everybody would have known that gender was a spectrum. There are so many Hindu gods, so many stories that has been told where gods took different forms, and it is all a part of the Ardhanayaka and then Vishnu and Krishna. There were a lot of them who had different roles and genders they played. And that's how Indian culture was till the Britishers came into India and they made everything binary because they couldn't align with what Indians' culture was at the time. So they changed the culture and they ostracized all the trans people and they put them out of the community. And that's how they ended up. They were revered in the temple courts, but then they were thrown out after the Britishers came in because they couldn't align with the society. You either get a job, and the only job they could get was in sex work and other areas. So if you really think about how the world has transformed over a period of time, I don't know about much in North America, but if you take because in North America, it's again based on the Caucasian culture, you have male and female. But if you take the Native American culture, there are 5 genders. If you take the Indian culture, they still agree that there are 3 genders. So there are so many genders in so many cultures. And it's always the way I understand is no matter all these terminologies are, I still want to I told my daughter that, sweetheart, I might look different, but I will always be your dad. Mm. And that is what is important to me. My relationship with my family, my relationship with my wife is so important, no matter what the world thinks about it. And I told my wife that I will always be a husband, no matter what happens in our lives. And that is one assurance that my wife was, that kept her going because she didn't want to lose her husband, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, we are so caught up in the stereotypes, and everyone wants you to put into those boxes that they have because they want to be a pansexual, or you want to be an intersex, or you want to be demisexual. These terminologies are great, but I don't want to be carried off in it because, unfortunately, these terminologies are not available in all languages.
Mm.
Let me tell you that. People don't even know what to tell the doctor in India if you have gender dysphoria.
Mm.
These terminologies don't matter at that point. I couldn't tell my doctor in UCLA that I have gender dysphoria. And when I told him that I have gender dysphoria, his first question was, I didn't think you will have gender dysphoria. The second point was, is it anxiety? What do I do? And I had to educate my doctor for 5 minutes. I had to tell him my story. And he said, you just touched my heart because I've never heard this kind of story before. Unfortunately, that's what trans people do. They have to advocate for themselves. And 1 out of 5 trans people are afraid to go to the doctors because of this very reason that doctors don't understand. If a trans man walks into a clinic and says that I have to get my pap smear, the admin person in the front desk, they look at them and say, why are you here? You're a man. And they tell them that, no, I'm a trans man, I have to get my pap smear. They don't get it. Because anatomically, all of us are still the same in various ways. A trans woman can still have prostate issues, right? A trans woman can still have, a trans man can still have osteoporosis. So those are things that people don't think about it. And it's so important for us to think about what terminologies, what is more vital, what is more important for for the community to understand me and my, because I didn't find a word in India that describes, in Indian language, that describes my gender dysphoria. The closest I found was anxiety. And that's what the doctors do today to trans people. They put you in conversion therapy, they put you in all these medicines. So these, I love these terminologies that helps, it kind of, again, stereotypes people. So to me, I as much as I like these terminologies as an educational purpose, personally, sometimes it's very different for me in my own life because I believe it's a spectrum.
Yeah, and I think that the big point here is to, make the distinction between, gender identity, your signed birth identity, and like what your attraction is, right? I mean, those are 3 completely separate things, and one doesn't define the other, right? And I think that's kind of the important piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to shift gears a little bit because, you have a background in tech, and since we talk a lot about tech here,
oh yeah,
I figure let's talk about that a little bit. One of the things that I think we touch on a lot is the importance of representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
In life, it's hugely important, as you've kind of identified, and I think it's just when I hear a story like yours, and you talk about going to a doctor who just doesn't even understand, what you're talking about, and there's millions of people that are going through the same things that you are, and I think that's just because we've been hiding these things, in society because we don't want to talk about them. And I think that does a disservice to everybody because I think, it impacts your life so negatively, but, people who may, be an ally don't even understand what they're doing. Right. Like that doctor you had, I mean, he it's just, sort of living in a life of ignorance. But I think the other piece of it too is, we're building things, and we talk about all the things we're building these days. And I know, like data and representation in data is a big, thing for you too. Can you speak to, just your perspectives on just the importance of inclusion in data and how that impacts people?
Yeah, this is a great topic for me because I work on data and analytics. They call it as data halo, where when you're walking on the street, you can just imagine there's data around your head, data all around you. And this data tells your information. And a lot of times you are in control of the data, or the data will be perceived by others to control you. And that's where I think it's important for data to, important for human beings to always have that human element when there's data connected. So one of the examples I can give you is when you're looking at artificial intelligence and you're having artificial intelligence, is that going to cause any bias? Yes, it is. And when you start looking at it from a technology and an information standpoint, you lose the human touch. And that's when discrimination starts. So a lot of people actually discriminated. And in my opinion, the AI council needs to be, you need to have diversity within the AI council. It cannot be run by brown or black, or sorry, not mostly black, but brown or white people in the tech industry being in the AI council. And that's why you need to have a lot more diversity even at that level to be able to make the right decisions in this, so that you can control the data going forward, because the data halo defines who you are. And another thing which I'll interestingly tell you, no matter what I tell about my life, I tell them I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a musician, I'm an immigrant. I give so much of data around me. I have masters in computer science. I worked on the first human genome project, all data. And I'm 23 years in a management consultant working with top 5 companies. Great information. All the data is around me, and I sit in front of a person. The one data that they look at me is, you are trans. I'm going to just take that data and evaluate you with that data. So your 23 years of experience, your mental health, or anything that they pull out from you can actually damage the person. Even though the data is like, for data from me, if they pull the data that I'm a trans person, they should still use the data for a good cause, not as a negative cause. Because that's what happened to me. Even in my resume, when I put my resume, when it goes through the automatic application tracking system, it reads the data and it says that Daniel and Celia, they, them, gender neutral. I don't get it. Application rejected. Bam. And so much that happens. I mean, I've got rejected all the time, because when it goes through the first level of screening, it doesn't understand. So I had to keep changing my resume. I put Daniel in my resume and put AKA Celia, got rejected. And then finally I said, okay, if I have professional experience with Daniel, let me just put Daniel and see if my resume is passing through. It passed through. But again, they're not able to put a lot of information together, because I said it's gender non-binary. And there's a part of it where I explain who I am, because I thought I should just mention it, though it's not necessary. It's not necessary to mention your gender, but I wanted the employers to know. I'll tell you another reason why. I was in this company, I was applying for a job, and a recruiter found my information, and I came out to the recruiter. I said, I'm Celia. And the recruiter did not even see me, right? They're just talking to me, and they said, oh, but I thought you're Daniel. Then they didn't say anything. I said, absolutely fine. We respect your gender. I'm arranging an interview. We really like your resume. So I was super happy. They got at my resume. They did background checks. They did everything, and on Daniel, not on Celia, because that is my professional resume. So they did all the checks, and it went through seamlessly. And now it was time for me I almost got the job. It was my first day to be introduced to the client. So this was an introductory meeting. So I got into the call exactly like this, because I don't have to disclose my gender, though companies can say anything. Now you can see when I got into the call, my hiring manager was an Asian woman like me, South Asian. I don't know where she is from in India, but she saw me on the call. Half an hour, she cut the call. And my recruiter never got back to me after a week. And then they said, I think that company that we are looking for, the product company wanted to give their own program manager, so we are not going to hire you. And I knew exactly what happened in the call, but nobody was able to explain, because in her mind, you are a hijra. I don't want you to be my manager managing a global initiative. I can't work with you. Now, what do you say about it? I mean, this is baffling. And that's why sometimes what I do is I could have filed a lawsuit against that company, but am I going to gain anything out of it? No, I started thinking about it differently, and I said, I'm going to educate this company. So I got into a panel, I started educating them. Now I'm actually helping them change the policies in this company, because that is what we need to do. Sometimes you can just go around and making a lot of noise about it, which might probably die in a few months. But when you make a lasting impact in these companies by having the right conversation at the right level, you will be able to make a change.
At the end of the day, data is about people. And there's two aspects to it that are really kind of important. One is that data, your personal data, can be used maliciously against you, right? To discriminate against you, to, do all sorts of terrible things, right? And the other piece of that is that your representation in the data as, part of the community in the data, if it's underrepresented, that leads to problems as well, right? I think, we've seen, just how people of color are treated differently in medical data. We have issues where, for women, a lot of medicines are tested on male mice only, because the hormones of a female mouse could skew the test results, and so they don't test it. But how does that work out when you're into a population of women with hormones that differ from what you were expecting too? So I mean, we produce a lot of bad data out of convenience. We produce a lot of bad data out of lack of representation, and we misuse data, and we use data maliciously, and that's tricky. And I think what you hit on that's really key, especially in these AI ML sort of conversations, is having a representative board, right? And I think that's diversity in that is really really critical, right? So so Celia, I wanted to also ask you about. I know you're one of the big things you're working with is Transcan work. You want to talk about that a little bit and tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Transcan Work is an organization that educates companies and employers to provide a safe space for the TGI community. When I say TGI, it is transgender, gender variant, and intersex community, so that they can hire these trans folks and also retain them in the company. A lot of times companies are excited that they want to hire trans people, but they don't know how to retain them because they don't have a right infrastructure. They don't have the right policies in place in order for them to keep it. And so we also help these organizations in putting the right policies in place so that they can retain transgender employees and TGI employees. It's important to educate these companies and also hire TGI job seekers and put them in these companies where they find a safe space, a safe community, and a place where they can thrive and be productive and be innovative and creative. And that's what companies want, end of the day. They want to have a good diversity and a mix of employees who feel empowered in an organization to bring in a lot more productivity. You can be profitable only if you have good employees working with you. They are not products; they are employees. So that is a way of making sure that that happens, and that's what we do at Transcan Work. And we educate employers, and we also empower our job seekers. So one of the ways in which we do is when a job seeker comes and asks us for a job, we provide a wraparound services. Sometimes they may go through mental illness. Sometimes they may go through homelessness. Sometimes they're living in a couch or living in a car where they don't have formal clothes even for an interview. So we provide all that. We provide a dress closet where we have formal clothing. We collect from some of our folks who are willing to donate, and we keep them in our dress closet within Transcan Work office so that they can even dress nicely for an interview, to the point where we help everyone. And this year, we are not only focusing on trans job seekers, but also we're focusing on trans entrepreneurs. So we've been partnering with a lot of companies, and they are also helping us in putting the blueprint for any trans folks who want to start business. How do you do it? And if you're an entrepreneur, you want to start an online business. So there are a lot of areas where we are helping make a change. So at Transcan Work, we invest in the lives of the TGI community. And we have seen a lot of that in the partnerships with HRC. because when HRC gives them a corporate equality index of 100%, we really want to make sure that they are 100%. So we work with them. We educate some of these companies more in the trans TGI area, because I think bottoms up approach is what we do. So in the LGBTQ spectrum, we focus on the T, and that is our main focus, because the T makes the change all the way from bathroom to boardroom. Not even the L, G, and B. L, G, and B don't have bathroom issues, but the T have the bathroom issues.
So, if somebody wanted to get in touch with TransCan Work, what would be the place to go to do that?
Yeah, they can definitely visit our website. We are listed on Instagram, Facebook, on LinkedIn as well. And there's transcanwork.org is the website name. And they can send in information if they want to send an email. It's info@transcanwork.org, and ask for any information possible. And we have lots of organizations wanting to partner with us, because they have seen so much of change and they want to change their organization. That's basically what it is. So it's been an exciting time, especially after COVID. We have a lot of job seekers, also a lot of employers who are willing to collaborate and try to provide them jobs. So it's been a very interesting time for us.
Yeah, it is an interesting time, and I think we also coming out of this pandemic, we sort of had this idea of remote work and things like that I think enables a broader spectrum of people to enter the workforce as well, which is really cool right now. So what's next for Celia?
That's the D part, the last D, the destiny.
Yes.
So,
destiny.
Yeah, I was. It's a good conversation to end with, because I was chatting with my wife. I told her, "Sweetheart, I'm 52 years old now. I just had a cardiac arrest, right? And I'm recovering from it. And I probably have, I don't know how much mileage I have. So what do I want to do with my life?" Mm-hmm. And she said, "You do what you want, but for the next 1 year, you have to pay for your daughter's college." So make sure we have money, as any Indian mom would do that, right? So I said, I will take care of that. I will do that. But the fun part is I think I know what I want, because to me, I don't want to be a CEO. I don't want to be a leader. I want to make leaders. I want to create leaders within the trans community. I remember I always go back to my childhood days in the beach where I was sitting and always crying because I didn't have hope. And I want to give hope to all the children who are going through anti-trans discrimination bills right now. Parents who are struggling with that because they don't know what to do. And those are the areas where I want to impact. And that's why I always feel like this is my destiny. This is what I'm called to do. And I'm no longer ashamed of who I am, because I was always ashamed of who I am. And I'm out in the Indian community. And I actually found interesting is a lot of Indian community also, they have changed over the years. And, they started appreciating what I do. And they said, "Oh, we have never seen a trans like you. We will give you a hug, maybe." So it's been interesting. And but I've always seen the younger generation change quickly than the older generation. So the baby boomers are, very conservative. But I'm very hopeful that no matter, even in the last breath in my body, I'll probably do what I'm going to do, which is helping my community and making sure that, we create more leaders and entrepreneurs. And we want to see astronauts going to space who are trans. And that's the kind of, because when you look at space and galaxy and everything, there's no gender there. Why are we just creating all these two peoples, male and female, going to space? It's got to be nothing there, because you probably have creatures living who are having a different gender altogether. We don't even know. We're so limited in our imagination. That's why I feel like we need to open all those boundaries and make sure that we are going across, thinking across, not in North America, but across the globe and across out of this planet. That's my ambition, and that's what I want to do going forward.
Well, mentorship is hugely important, and and I think you're right. I mean, I see just it's been a huge shift in the world and how people are regarded and accepted, and that hopefully will continue. And I think like your vision of the future. I'm a big fan of Star Trek, And I think I think I think there's a future for everybody in the future. So really appreciate that. And keep doing the good work. Keep going strong. Stay healthy, and both mentally and physically. And thank you so much for sharing your story. It was hugely impactful, I think. And hopefully, if there's people out there who are suffering and need mentorship, maybe they can find their way to you. So
Yeah,
appreciate you
absolutely.
being on.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much, Sandesh. I really enjoyed this conversation because it was very heartfelt, casual, and also so important and impactful to me as well.
Yeah.
The more I talk, it's nice to, and also, you coming from an Indian background or origin, it's you can relate to all the stigma that's attached to it and amplify this kind of stories because we need to. And I really appreciate both of you being a wonderful ally to me and my community, because this is what is important. This is what we need to do more and more.
Yeah, you know how you have your fifth D is destiny. Chris and I have been talking about our legacy, and what is it that we want to leave behind. Now that we have children, and Chris has definitely helped me on my journey. But I think part of why this is so important to me is I have found myself in conversations with my own family. Right? People that I love dearly. I have a very big family. I have 30-some first cousins, very big Patel Gujarati conservative, Desi family. And, the arguments could be Muslims versus Hindus, and somebody could make a Muslim comment. And my first reactions were very aggressive. And I would be like, God, it's just so ridiculous. You cannot talk like that, And I realized that I wasn't making any headway that way. And so the way I think to do it is to have the dialogue, stay calm, educate, but have the conversation. As difficult as it is, I want to start having more and more of these conversations because for my legacy, this is what I want to leave for my children is I don't ever want them to judge anyone, for anything but who they are as a human being, and if this is a personal conversation for me. I'm going to make sure a lot of my family see it, and I can't wait for them to watch it, to be honest. And I can't wait for us to talk about it because this is more important to me than my day job. This is very important, and so I just can't say enough. Thank you. And I don't know if this is appropriate or whatnot, but I don't know if I can say this, but you're beautiful. I mean, you're beautiful looking. You're a beautiful person. I mean, it's just incredible, really. Thanks for everything.
Thank you so much. You both are amazing people and amazing human beings. I can't thank enough. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please click that like button, hit that subscribe button because that helps the channel a ton. And if you want to get notified when we post new content, click on that bell icon and you'll get notifications. And I will see you in the next video.